Welcome everybody to our webinar, and we have a very special guest, Emily Cherkin, who joined us today. And thank you everybody who are joining us live. And also, I know that many people requested the recording afterwards because they can't come tonight for different reasons. So before we do the introductions, I just wanted to, because Emily was just asking me a minute ago before we started the recording about what's happening in Lower Merion. And Lower Merion, so I'll just give a very brief introduction, I promise, because there's a lot of things going on here. It's a district in the suburbs of Philadelphia. And what has happened, I can basically share my story, is that about a year ago or so, I have two kids in second grade and in kindergarten. And then I learned that my child in kindergarten has an iPad. And in my opinion, I did not want him to have it. It didn't match what I think was right for the kids. And so I spoke with the principal, I spoke with the teacher, and we opted him out. With my daughter, and there's another girl who opted out. And the first few days was difficult, but he loves it. He's so happy. In fact, he may hop and tell you a little bit of his experience. My daughter, who's in second grade, she has not opted out yet, but the more we're learning about it, she's telling me awful things about iReady, because she's the pilot class of iReady. It's boring, and we don't want her in front of computers. So what has happened over the course of the last few months, other people started feeling this. We started reaching out to each other and talking about it. Do we really need all these computers, all this one-to-one machines? We're not anti-technology. I work in technology, and I think that it's, very important. And Emily is definitely going to talk about it in a few minutes. But anyway, one person reached out to another, and then we started putting pressure on the district. We found that the district actually has a policy that we can opt out if we want. And the principal of the school will be responsible for creating an equivalent educational pen and paper program. So we put a lot of pressure, didn't work. The school said, well, you just can't do it. It's too much. It's ingrained within the curriculum, iReady and whatnot. So one thing led to another. Now there's a petition of about 500 parents in the district who are, I wouldn't say angry, but they really feel strongly about opting out next coming school year. And this is kind of like now being covered nationally, and there's a lot of attention. We don't know what's exactly going to happen, and this is all in progress. So this is kind of the brief kind of beginning story, and I think it's important to share because there are more and more districts within the United States that are finding themselves, the parents, grassroots, are finding themselves in a similar situation. So with that, thank you everybody for joining. And I'd like to introduce Jill. And Jill Anderson is a perfect moderator. Some of you heard her last week. She is a teacher, I would say one of the most famous teachers, I think, in the community who are interested in opting out and screens, etc. She's also a parent. She's a community organizer. She's also the founder of Mindful Tech Lessons. She has over 20 years of classroom experience, and she has a background in educational psychology. She is super passionate about supporting families and educators navigate all this technology, education technology, etc., in ways that protect the childhood and support true learning. And she remains, above all, a super enthusiastic teacher. She talks to teachers, she gives workshops to teachers, and I love hosting and moderating together with her. So thank you, Jill, so much. Please.
Oh, and thank you, Dad of the Year, for everything you're doing in your district and for your kids, and for having me. It's such a pleasure because I like to talk about this stuff. So I'm very, very excited to introduce Emily Cherkin, who I'm a big fan. Also known as the Screentime Consultant. Emily has a Master's of Education and is an author, a public speaker, a consultant, an associate professor of public policy at the University of Washington. She's also the co-chair of Fair Play's Screens in Schools Action Network, which I may be biased, is a great group of advocates. And Emily's leading the fight for a tech-intentional childhood and works with schools, families, government agencies, and advocacy organizations to ensure a future of education that prioritizes play, skills, and relationships over screens, EdTech, and more recently, AI. So as you can see, Emily is many things, but what really stands out most to me is that she's a mom who offers real validation and support. And for parents and educators that are really trying to do what's best for children, Emily shows up. She's always volunteering her time. She's writing, she's testifying. She creates accessible resources like the Unplug EdTech Toolkit, which you can get and download now for free. And we really, really appreciate all you
Hmm.
do for our children and our communities. And, we're not wrong. We're not crazy, in the words of Andy. We're just early. And I'm
Exactly.
living by that now.
Exactly. Thank you, Jill. It's really an honor to be here. Thank you for having me.
We thought we would start with like the most basic question for people that don't understand the difference between what is the difference between ed tech and tech ed, which
Oh,
is,
yeah.
your
Yeah.
explanation is wonderful.
Yeah, this is such a great question because it's very easy to paint those of us who have concerns about the use of tech in school as anti-tech or Luddites, which if you read the actual origin of that story, it's a really it's a compliment in my view. But the reality is I always say this, I'm not anti-tech, I'm tech intentional. And what that means to me is, using tech in alignment with our values, child development, what we know is best pedagogically, what's safe, what's legal, what's effective. My TLDR essentially of tech intentionality is really just less is more, later is better, relationships and skills before screens. And that's it. And I apply that to both phones and social media and smartphone and gaming and the products and platforms that kids get at school. And so when we talk about ed tech versus tech ed, what I am trying to argue is that EdTech is an industry just like big tech. It's the same business model. They use the same algorithms. They use data mining. They create profiles about their users. It's about scaling. It's about selling products. It is not about child development. It is not about education. That is very different than technology education, which is teaching children about technology. What is an algorithm? How does the internet work? How do I know how to identify what's mis and disinformation? How do I navigate the internet safely, right? All of those things could not be more important to teach. But that is not what's happening in education. We are looking at ed tech and not at tech ed. So ed tech is big tech in a sweater vest is one thing I say all the time. And ed tech is not tech ed.
Well, I love that. I love that. You gotta get a little bumper sticker. No.
Yes. T-shirts.
So what is, I had another question, but just to follow up what you were saying,
Yeah.
how is, when you're talking about tech ed and, intentional teaching about technology, how would you imagine in a school that still has computers? I'm not talking about a classical school or a religious school that has absolutely no screens. A school, maybe a public school that eventually adopts this opt out and has some sort of education that is focused on technology, kind of like what you're saying, to
Right.
learn about the internet, etc. How
Right.
would it look like in your imagination, or are there
Yeah.
any examples of this happening in public schools in the United States?
I think a few are headed that way. I would say we just rewind 20 years and that's what it looks like. It's a computer lab or a laptop cart model with a technology education teacher. It's not that hard. We've done it before. We can do it again. I really think, in fact, the argument, well, I can't understand why we wouldn't do that at this point. It's more cost effective. It's more effective. It's better for teachers and learning. Now, what you were saying at the beginning, Yair, which I think this is what you were saying, I think it was you, is that this is an ecosystem. That one of the things that makes this so difficult, that when we talk about opting out or refusing the one-to-one, we are pulling out like a piece of the Jenga tower, and it's going to wobble a lot of the other parts. Testing has gone digital. Learning management systems are digital. Grading is digital. But that is fine in my mind because I think the system needs to crumble and be rebuilt. I don't think it's serving anybody except the tech companies who built these products and profit from them. So yes, it's complicated. Yes, it will be messy. And yes, we need to do it if what we really care about is protecting children and teachers, I might add. This isn't just about children. I think this is also about protecting teachers.
So one more follow-up question, and I'll
Yeah.
pass it to Jill. Many teachers, I mean, a lot of teachers have reached out to me in the last few weeks because they know that I coordinate a lot of the stuff in our district, and some of them, many of them, or all of them actually very confidentially, fear with retaliation and stuff. And they're
Yeah.
telling us horrible stories, especially in middle school, kids on the internet all the time, YouTube videos,
Yeah.
not, I haven't heard in our school, but certainly pornography, Epstein Island, which is very common in our
Yeah.
district to watch, kids loading up, downloading stuff on their computer and then watching it in the bus or at
Yeah.
home, computer games, etc. So
Yes.
there's many parents who are like, we don't want one-to-one personalized devices. But there are still some teachers who are saying, is there any value of using the technology beyond teaching about technology and about internet to use it as a key, for example, or a tool to use math, not as a one-to-one only, but so in your
Yeah.
opinion, should
Yeah.
we be using computers only to learn about computers and internet and coding and things of that sort? Or is there any role of using computers for reading, for social sciences, for math?
hmm Um, no, there isn't a reason in the sense that it's financially a better choice, that it's pedagogically a better approach, that it's more effective. Um, doesn't mean that we can't do that. I think there are ways to do that. I think that what we're going to see happen as more schools pull back on EdTech is that EdTech companies are going to remarket and rebrand their products as different, that this is for learning, this is educational. One of the problems is that these are internet connected products. I think actually what would be hilarious is just take away the internet. I mean, hilarious in the sense that I think it would prove the point that this is all internet based and that that's actually 90% of the, okay, maybe not 90%. It's a big chunk of the problem. And that if we were not giving kids internet access at school, I mean, you have kids arriving in kindergarten being given iPads when their parents have said, no way, we're not doing that. And yet the school is giving it to them. So look, again, to me, the intentional piece of it is, can we do it? Yes. Should we do it? I don't know. That's up for debate. It's so expensive. It isn't better than a human teacher 99.9% of the time. And so, that's where I land on it is like, I think you have to look the four questions that we ask in this work. And I added the fourth one more recently, but is it safe? Is it effective? Is it legal? Is it better than a human? Only when the answer is yes to all four of those should we use it. And, that's probably an extreme position to take. I think there probably is a slightly softer version where that could still be balanced and healthy, but that's not what the industry goal is right now. That's not what they're going for.
Say one more time before slowly because it's really important.
Yeah, is it effective? And Jared Cooney Horvath's research proves unequivocally that it is not. Is it safe? I'm sorry, if children can access porn at school, by definition, not safe, right? Epstein Island, even video games, YouTube, that's not safe.
And more bullying.
More bullying. I mean, on and on. The
Yeah.
physical health, the eye health, there's so many reasons it's not safe.
Yeah.
Number three is legal. We can look at the active cases under EdTech Law Center's website to just know that there are numerous class action lawsuits against many of what I call the most powerful companies you've never heard of, who are worth $6 billion, right? They're as powerful as Meta and Google, but you just don't know them because they're EdTech companies. To know that it is also problematic in terms of their legal, and really a lot of these cases are either product liability or about data mining, data collection, data sale. And that's being played out in the courts right now. And we're going to hear a lot more about that in the next year. But the fourth question, because it used to be I just said those three, but the problem I was realizing is that EdTech these companies were going to take those and be like, aha, we can do a safe, effective, and legal approach. And then I realized even if those three things were all yeses, it still has to be superior to a human teacher because teaching happens in the context of learning happens in the context of human relationships. And if you remove the human or you put the human on the side, you are denigrating and devaluing the benefit of a teacher or student relationship. Look, we have a lot of work to do as adults. The education system has a lot of issues. I think I share Jared's response that it's not broken. It has problems, but it's not broken. And what we have to do in this fight is we are fighting for all of these students, right? I think a common pushback is that like, well, you're only talking about your one special precious child. No, I am out here speaking on behalf of every child who has a right to a public education in America. And that when we are speaking out for all of those children. I will add one asterisk, however, Yair, which is that there are some children for whom a tech-based product, well, maybe it's a tool in this case, might level the learning playing field for them. And I'm thinking of like a nonverbal child who might use a device for communication. That is the exception, not the rule, however. Just because one child needs prescription eyeglasses in a class doesn't mean you give the whole class the same prescription eyeglasses. That's absolutely absurd. And yet that's what we're doing. And we could go down that rabbit hole as well, but like, that's how I would answer that. Is that good? Okay.
So, my question is based a little bit on my experience because I will be honest, I had very high barrier for technology in my home with my children, and I always did. But as a teacher, that was wooed by
Yeah,
what, like, I
yeah,
was like, oh, it's different if it's educational, it's
yes,
different. And so I guess I wanted you to talk a little bit about some of the common ways that ed tech marketing is able to convince
yeah,
districts and teachers to
yes.
purchase and use their products because even with the best of intentions, we can be fooled.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Look, are there certain small, scrappy companies that do an incredible job on like a certain topic or a certain subject? Yeah. And I'm not going after the little guys here, right? Like for the most part, there are many that are problematic. I'm talking again about these $6 billion private equity owned companies. The way that they convince us, teachers, parents, and administrators. I mean, we are first of all, they love to see us fight amongst ourselves because when we are divided, we are weaker. And we do not see them as the common target. That's strong language. But what I mean is we're on the same team, parents, teachers, and admin. What and to be fighting amongst ourselves serves the ed tech companies. The other thing is that there's a lot of propaganda out there and it mimics and echoes what we heard with big tobacco. So, and I have a whole bunch of essays about this, the myths of ed tech. It could be like, for example, children need this to be successful in the future. I mean, it's a laughable thing when you actually pause and think about that for a minute, because first of all, none of the tech bros running these companies had any of this crap as kids themselves, right? They turned out not just fine, but worth billions. So they were managed to have quite successful careers in spite of it. They also don't let their own children use this. They don't want them out at school and they don't give them phones and social media at home. So it's for thee, but not for me, right? So that is a problematic way of thinking. There's a lot of FOMO playing up our fear of like, you're going to be left behind if you don't do this. This is cutting edge. This isn't a new argument in education that you don't want to be left behind on, whatever the newest, latest, greatest thing is. Those have yet to pan out as having been successful or effective for the most part. I mean, really, technology and education, when it's done by private companies, has not been a success for decades. It's not just, the last few years. I hear stories of ed tech companies whining and dining school administrators or having teachers as paid influencers for their products, just like you would see on Instagram, right? Like, hawking their wares and getting kickbacks, which is could bring up the question of why are we not paying teachers more so that they don't need to have a side gig to get kickbacks, right? Like, I mean, there's all kinds of other problems with this, but those are just a few. I mean, I think I have a list of 16 on my website of all of the myths about ed tech. So I'm happy to go into more of them. Those are definitely high level
Yeah.
ones. I would just say too, I posted about this and it kind of went crazy, but like the best preparation for a digital future is an analog childhood,
Yeah.
period. That's it. Because you can learn this stuff so easily. That's one of the amazing things about technology is how easy it is to use, right? At its basic level. I'm not talking high level coding, but
Yeah.
turning on a phone and a computer and navigating the internet is not that difficult. We learn it really quick. Look at little toddlers who figure it out within seconds.
Yeah.
But what skills we do need to practice and build over, our childhood, we don't get that opportunity back. We have to spend time prioritizing those skills, executive function, learning, focus skills, cognitive flexibility, emotion regulation, all of those have to come first. And we don't get a chance if we don't get them in childhood.
Got it.
Yeah.
You froze for a second, but I'll jump. There is a question that I wanted to ask you, but actually there's
Oh,
a
sorry.
question from the audience that I'm going to jump straight to the question to the audience because it's talking about the false, the false assumption that people are making. And I want you to address this because this is something that is very relevant to our district, Lower Merion School District, a
Yes.
huge topic of discussion throughout every single board meeting, and rightfully so, is the achievement gap and equity. And what we're hearing initially is
Yeah.
that, well,
Yeah.
there's the phones and giving devices for kids who, for example, can't afford otherwise internet, and Chromebooks is something that is so important. And it basically it basically closes the gap between everybody and closes or helps with equity and reduces the achievement
Yeah.
back. Yeah. So what do you have to say about this? Is the question of Jordan. Can you speak
Yeah.
to the equity piece, the idea of one-to-one devices?
Yeah.
Internet allows for children to make
Yes.
all of that.
Yeah. This is another common myth about EdTech. And it was true initially that there was a disproportionate gap between who had access to technology and who did not. That is no longer the case. When we look at saturation rates, like how many children have internet connected devices accessible to them, I mean, I don't know what exactly it is, but it's in the high 90s percentile wise, right? So, and again, this gets a little muddy because are we talking about internet access or are we talking about computers? Because people don't really use computers without the internet anymore. I mean, this is a whole new world in terms of what we're talking about with technology. The other thing that I want to encourage people to resist a little bit is because that's old argument, and I want to be clear that what I'm saying is not that I am anti-equity, right? I know that it is easy to manipulate what I'm saying as somehow being opposed to equitable outcomes. That is absolutely not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is that that line of thinking has been manipulated and used as propaganda to justify the incursion of these for-profit companies in public education at the expense of children. And the children who are most harmed by this are the ones who are historically most marginalized or harmed by changes like this. So, and again, when we talk about equity, are we talking about race? Are we talking about socioeconomic status? Are we talking about ability, learning abilities? Are we talking about nationality? Like there's different ways of measuring equity, but on many of these measures, EdTech products have a negative effect on the populations, on the very populations that schools are claiming to prioritize and to protect. Does that make sense?
But why? Maybe give us a couple of I'm thinking about a family who is, maybe a single mother, hardworking that has multiple kids. Why would the families with the children, in that scenario will have more of a negative effect than somebody who's maybe more
Right. Well, because they're disproportionately spending more time online, right? And so just by the risk that comes to them because of the number of hours being higher is alone going to make that child more vulnerable. The other problem is, as I was saying before, it's not just about what it does or doesn't do in terms of its efficacy. Like, is this a high quality product? It's that it's so much more than that. It's that a book would be better. Is that handwriting assignments would still be better for that child in terms of their learning outcomes. It would be that, I would rather children have no homework than be sent home with an internet connected Chromebook.
I was just thinking that. I was like, if we're really focusing here on just a computer for homework, then let's just give homework that doesn't require a computer.
100%, 100% agree. And again, there's all kinds of debate about whether homework is equitable and good and bad. And of course, Jill knows this too. Like there's high quality versions of homework and there's low quality versions.
Yeah.
But here's an example, I think, of how the homework and the equity thing gets all muddled. My daughter's in middle school, public school, 1,000 kids, 6 through 8. Her English class last year had 39 students in every class. Just beyond insanity to me that you could have 39 middle school, 7th grades, and the new science or the new English curriculum, the new ELA curriculum has one assigned text per year. One book that she is reading. And actually in 8th grade, she's reading one text and it's The Outsiders, which is a great book, but you can read it pretty fast. And it used to be like a 6th grade reading level. So the argument is that kids will read these books, they will do independent reading. And that because the argument is kids should be reading more, which I totally agree with. Kids should be reading more books. But what's happening is kids are either not reading the books or they are picking books that they've already read or that are very easy, or they're just searching up a summary of the book so that when they have to upload the video of their independent book report, they're just regurgitating something that they accessed on the school district computer. So none of this actually benefits the child. Yeah. And then of course, the other thing that made me furious is I found out that teacher was being told, because she said, I'm so overwhelmed by grading all the written work coming in, and half of it's written by ChatGPT anyway, and was told to use AI to assess student writing. So it's mind-boggling to me that this is happening, that we're even debating this topic. Go put those computers in another room and just let them talk to each other while the teachers and the students literally sit and read a short story out loud would be more beneficial for all of the people in the room than whatever is on that laptop. You got me really fired up because I'm a former English teacher and I find it so offensive what's happening from a
Yeah.
curriculum standpoint right now.
And it's I've been hearing across the board at how many fewer books people are getting through in schools now, and it's
Yeah.
really, really
Yes.
alarming.
It is
I
alarming.
agree.
It is alarming because again, like it is all too complicated. We have
Yeah.
over complicated education. And again, I'm not saying that there aren't problems, but if we literally just went back to trusting that teachers have autonomy and expertise, and again, there are issues with higher ed and there are issues with teacher programs that say, here's a plug and play internet-based curriculum. This is how you teach today. There are
Mhm.
problems with that. I acknowledge that. But if we went back to workbooks, even today I saw this. It was like, well, I want to opt out of the science curriculum because it's all digital, but the school says we've only bought the digital version. So teachers are printing off copies of it on paper. And the whole argument for buying the digital one was that there wasn't a budget for paper. But now teachers are printing it off. And again, the burden of the opt out, and I know I'm going back to where we started here, but it's like it is going to fall on teachers unfairly. I
Yeah.
don't like that. This isn't why I'm doing what I'm doing. But to me, the opting out is a means to an end. It's to rattle the Jenga tower enough that schools are forced, and by schools I mean administrators and board of ed and superintendents are forced to go, oh, maybe we shouldn't spend $1 million per year on a ed tech product that actually doesn't even work, that kids hate, and maybe we'd invest that back in the teachers instead. I don't know, crazy idea, but that's,
Yeah.
by the way, there are between 100 and 150 unique ed tech products per
Yeah.
school. And if you're contracting with different ones for $1 million a year, that's where the money is. And I know there's all kinds of budgets and all that stuff, but like it is inexcusable to me.
Yeah. One of the things that I feel lucky about is that I teach in a district where I feel like I don't have these obstacles. So I feel lucky that I can speak out because that's not the
Amazing.
experience I'm living. And I know that not all teachers can speak up, especially when job security is a concern. And when parents raise issues about screen time and ed tech, I notice that the conversation can get redirected or
Yes.
framed as anti-teacher, which is
Yes.
interesting because most of the people advocating are teachers, interestingly. So, can you talk about why reducing ed tech is actually very pro-teacher and supportive
Yes.
of the work happening in the classrooms?
Yes. I think you're touching on several things. One is I absolutely understand teacher fear. I mean, I think I'd probably get fired if I were a classroom teacher today because I'm not going to not say anything at this point. I'm so angry. But I understand that and I want to acknowledge it. I also think, and this is very interesting to me, the most vitriol and hate I get is from a very small subset of teachers who are angry at me for putting more work on them, for implying that this is somehow, I mean, and I get it. I do understand that. But I think the majority of teachers don't feel that way. And those are just the loud voices. Anecdotally, I posted a video. I didn't think it was that much of a hot take less than 24 hours ago. It has 750,000 views. And all I said was, I don't think parents should have access to digital grading portals. Here's why. And I had to turn off comments because it went so awful so fast.
Gosh.
And what is interesting to me about this is that it was parents pointing fingers at teachers and teachers pointing fingers at parents, blaming and shaming both directions. And to what I was saying earlier, the tech industry loves it when that happens
Yeah.
because it pits us against each other rather than as allies. Of course, then you get into the trolls who don't listen to the video and are just dogpiling on comments, and that's a different problem. But the reason that I think this is such an important fight is because we are protecting not just children in education and the learning process. We are protecting the profession and institution of teaching
Thank
and the professionalism of the role. And actually, I would extend even to democracy itself. Because if we raise children who cannot think for themselves, and again, writing is thinking. They're not writing. I mean, they're pecking, but really, actually, they're doing voice to text even in elementary school. Like literally writing, but writing as in thinking through our thoughts. We threaten institutions from here to here. I think one of the biggest mistakes we've made was in an attempt to standardize education. We've also attempted to standardize teaching, and people are not standardized. So the goal of an ed tech company, just like big tech, I mean, just like Google, just like these other massive tech companies, is to scale. It is to do more with less. They are not quiet about that being their goal. They talk about this all the time. How do we scale this? What that means for teachers is how do we do more with fewer teachers? How do we sideline teachers to reach more kids? That's what this whole buzz about personalized learning is right now. And Jill might remember this too, but like 20 years ago when I was a teacher and doing professional development, actually it was 25 years ago, really at this point, all of our professional developments were about personalized learning and differentiating instruction. And all that meant 25 years ago, way pre one-to-ones, was that you met your student where they were because you knew who they were, you knew what they were capable of, and you knew what they needed support on. That's what personalized learning is. Now, the attempt to take that personal, remember the key word here, person, and put it into a digital platform presumes standardization. It presumes that if you put in A, you will get B every time. And people aren't like that. So that is, to me, I think it is absolutely a threat to the profession of the teacher
Yep.
position.
That
And
that is my
yeah,
biggest fear, that we are replaced by whatever platforms, AI
yes,
robots, and when
yes,
we differentiated, we had groups, and nobody ever said we had to have, 20 something individualized plans, because you know
yeah,
what? The world does not need us 100% where we are. So you would have
exactly.
a few groups,
Yeah,
and that's realistic, and we can do that, and so they
yes.
kind of just took that idea and tried to make it extra.
Well, and to go back to the equity piece of this too, and I have a really great friend who's a researcher in London, Dr. Hillman, and she wrote a great op-ed about it in The Guardian. And she said, what is going to happen is that these AI platforms that are being pitched as personalized learning tools are going
Yeah.
to end up meeting the needs of overworked teachers with large class sizes in under-resourced districts. And so poor children, low income children, children who are already disenfranchised are going to get robots and AI chatbots as teachers, and children who have more resources in their school or parents who are advocating or can advocate are going to get human teachers. If
Yeah.
that's not inequity, I don't know what is. That to me is absolutely concerning. And so, she writes and researches a lot about that. I highly recommend. She does a lot on LinkedIn, so she's a great person
Yeah.
to follow. But that's what's happening, and that's the goal. And so we've got to reclaim this idea of personalized learning as being about people, not
Yes.
bots. Yeah.
I love it. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Exactly.
you're welcome.
So I wanted to ask you a question about opt-out, but I have so many follow-up questions to what you just said. So first of all, just an observation as somebody who is not a teacher, but I've been speaking with a million people in the last year or so, including a lot of teachers, and assessing how different boards and different superintendents, etc. You're talking about the tension sometimes between the parents and the teachers. What I have noticed in our district and others is the tension
Oh
between
yeah.
teachers and the leadership. And I can tell you, for
Yes.
example, in the big meeting, we put so much pressure on our district to have a big meeting to talk about phones, to talk about Chromebooks, one-to-one, all these things. They came with 22 panelists, and they knew exactly what they were going to say. Everything is fine. Don't worry. There's no issues with the. Yeah, there's some glitches, but overall, it's a great experience. It's great. And yet, this is in stark contrast to what I've spoken with teachers, and mostly teachers with more than 10, maybe
Yeah.
20 years, retired teachers. This tension that, but of course, like we talked about, the teachers cannot just say, hey, screw you. We're not
Right.
using iReady because these people will be fired. And then the
Yeah.
second, so that's a comment. But I have a question for you
Yeah.
that actually was raised to me by experienced teachers. Do you think that if this continues this way, if the pushback of the EdTech industry will continue and all the Chromebooks, et cetera, the new generations of teachers, those who are only,
Yeah.
since COVID, 5 years, is it already too late? If they've been practicing and teaching for 5 years, 7 years, only on the white thing that, you don't even read. I've been hearing stories that the
Yeah.
kids, they're not reading the story anymore. It's the what they're just sitting in their
Yeah.
YouTube or whatever it is that the teachers are grading electronically. Is it too late, or do you think that we can still rectify the situation?
I think that's a really good question. I think the pendulum swing is coming, but we haven't seen the worst of it yet. There's going to be a wave. This is my prediction. Like if you think about, I teach at the university level. And like, so those are, 18, 19, 20-year olds. And they had one-to-ones kind of middle school, high school. When I show them pictures of kindergartners on iPads in classrooms, they are flabbergasted, right? Like, so there is a wave coming, and the COVID babies, and again, like I'm not blaming and shaming parents either on this. Like as I always said, like the technology, for better or worse, was the tool we needed in the spring of 2020. The
Yes.
lifeboat we needed, but a lifeboat is not long-term housing. That's what I always say. And, we just didn't pull it back at school or at home when we went back. But, those kids are now, what is it, kindergartners to middle school age. When that population, I think high school needs to brace itself that there's going to be this wave coming in right now. But I have hope for the parents whose kids are now in that 0 to 5 range. I think there is a lot more attention being paid to how much their own children are being exposed. But you're actually asking about the teachers too. I think there is going to be a reckoning in higher ed as well. I mean, I'm definitely following a lot of that, especially with AI just decimating higher ed. And it's really like, what's the point at this point? And so I do think there is going to be some pretty earth-shaking stuff. And I will say in that, 750,000 view post today, I did get a comment from a teacher who was like, I am in the beginning of my teaching career right now, and I'm just so flabbergasted by what I'm seeing. And so that gives me hope, that some of these teachers, new teachers, are going to be like, wait a minute, this doesn't make any sense. Like,
Yeah.
and, I think it'll come from both ends. But there will be a pocket. Yeah, I think that's
I
what
mean,
we're,
I feel very grateful that I remembered teaching before all this to go back
right?
to it. And as I started going back into those habits, I started remembering more and more things I used to do. And I
Yeah,
have to tell you, it's so much better. It's
no,
so much better.
yeah,
And what I notice is that the
yeah,
less I'm worrying about the technology, not
yeah,
even just for them, but even for me, like I don't need every slide to be perfect. And
no.
like the more my energy is with them.
Yes,
And
yes, exactly.
it's like so many different layers, to be honest with you.
Exactly. No,
But
that's
Jill,
it. It's the
I had a
deplete.
question for Jill actually. What
Yeah.
tell me more about the examples of what you have not done when you're only on the Chromebooks, etc., and what you now that you're going back to pen and paper, what are some of the examples that you see in yourself as a teacher that is
Mm,
different?
Well, I feel like I'm more in the moment. Like if I was working with a small group, I used to then have, so we have this period called what I need, win period. A lot of schools in this area have it, and it's no new instruction because we know that kids are leaving for service providers. So I would always meet with a group at that time, and then there'd
mm,
be a group that left. The other kids that were there, that was their personalized what I need learning time on a Chromebook. And I realized that this was ridiculous. So what I did is I totally stopped doing that. And now I've made that centers. Instead of
yeah.
the math game one-to-one on a device, they actually are learning real math games that they're playing with each other. And
Right.
then as the year goes on, maybe I have two kids in charge of learning a new game, and then their job is to teach the rest. And I love bringing parents in. I think that is so important. So a dad came in September and taught my class chess. So
Oh,
now one of the stations every day is chess in my class. My whole class can play chess.
that's amazing.
Like and that I think is just so amazing. And so like
Yeah.
I just have noticed that like when you sort of commit to not doing something, you kind of all these new things come back, and it's actually so much better that and then I heard somebody advocating the other day for how great the technology is where we can watch the screens of them. And I was thinking of you, Emily, when you were saying like no teacher wants to stare at a screen of little screens.
No, that's not why we got into education.
And
And
it's so true.
it's like
So I can say,
yeah.
got you?
God, no. And no, yeah. That's such a great example. And like you were talking yeah, you're about like the voice reading the book. One of my favorite things as an English teacher was to read out loud to my students. My seventh graders. I read out loud almost all of the books we would read. And
Oh,
I still think about how powerful that was. And I still get
yeah.
students coming back and being like, remember when you read of Mice and Men? And like,
Oh,
because it's in the moment that you pivot and you see a kid reacting and you ask a question and you know that this kid's tuned out. So you draw them back in. A, a,
yes.
a bot isn't going to ever be able to do that. And so
No.
I love that. And it's the displacement, I think, is what you're talking about too, is like when we use indoor recess or free choice time as screen-based options. First of all, we're normalizing it that that's what we
Yeah.
do when we have free time, right? And boy, do adults have a big issue with this too, that that's what we're doing, reaching for our phones, watching shows. And again, we're adults, we get to choose how we spend our time, but we shouldn't
Yes.
be normalizing that that's what children should reach for. Like that worries me a lot is the modeling piece, the normalization
Yes.
of it. That I have an assistant who helps me manage a lot of my stuff, and he was touring kindergartens in the city where he lives, and he said he was just flabbergasted. He's been working with me for a few years, and he's like, I know your work, I know what you do, and I was still floored
Yeah.
by what I saw. People, the school administrators bragging about the fact that the gym now had a large screen in his.
Oh, don't even get me started on that.
Like, I just can't see any scenario in which that financial commitment to that product, also in a gym where kids kick balls around. Like, are you kidding? Remember they put the cages on the clocks because they didn't want the
I know,
basketballs to
yeah.
break the clocks. I just do not understand like that choice at all. But like, that's just one example. But like, why? Why? Who does it benefit? I mean, really, that's the
Yeah.
question is who is this for? And
Yeah.
who does it benefit? And it's not the kids and
No.
rarely the teachers. Yeah.
And I wanted to make a comment before Jill takes the next question, because what you said about, in my opinion, of reading to children, reading aloud is telling a story is so important. And I'm an old dad. One of the reasons that I'm an old dad is because I traveled and I lived in different places. And I remember that when I lived in China, when you go to different places and different
Yeah.
towns and cities, there's always a central park. And very frequently you see a man or a woman who are standing either with a book or just like this. And there's a crowd of people around them. And they're just basically telling a story, telling a story, telling a story.
Uh,
And then
Yeah.
it made me think. And then another time of my life, a few years later, I was traveling in Ireland and I was hitchhiking all over over the place and staying at people's houses who just hosted me. And I stayed at a lady's house. And later I found out she's one of the most famous storytellers in Ireland because there's a profession of storytelling.
Yes.
People either in
Oh,
classes or in
yes.
rooms or
Yes.
in the local pubs or whatever, they go and they tell stories and you see everybody's like sitting and
Yeah.
listening because there's something so powerful and ancient almost.
Yeah.
And the fact
Yes.
that
Yes.
the whiteboard is showing you somebody reading a story is not the same thing.
No, no, no. I mean, yeah, I could go on and on about the value of reading out loud and why. Like, literally, if there are like three simple things parents could do right now to make sure that their children turn out okay, it's to eliminate as much technology as possible. Not all. I recognize that there's some, entertainment purposes occasionally can be fun, and read books to them. That's it. That's two things, I guess. And let them play outside without hovering and micromanaging. Those three things. That would be one way to protect childhood that would have such a huge net benefit.
yeah.
Even one of those three things would be great. Yeah.
Uh, one of my favorite questions, and it because this personally shifted. Like I said, I was always so attuned to it at home, but it wasn't until I had children that I became attuned to it at school in my teacher role. So my question for you is because you've obviously been in this field before you were a mom, is how has becoming a parent shifted your work? What do you see or experience differently?
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good question. It's funny, I had both my children within a year of Apple product releases. So the first iPhone and
Ah,
the iPad is about when my children were born. And so I've kind of seen them grow up with those products. Um, I I loved being a teacher. I love being a teacher. That was one of the most rewarding jobs I ever had. And then parenting is a whole different part of your brain and emotion and
yeah.
heart than teaching. But um, I think there were some things about us as parents when our children were little. Like there was a moment where my son was about 8 and my husband was reading or was lying in bed with him at night and he had his phone, like kind of, he was doing this with his phone, like while my son was trying to go to sleep. And my son sat up and he goes, Daddy, I can't compete with your iPhone. And it
Oh.
was like, that was probably 10 years ago. It was like dagger to the heart. And it was so they were our teachers as much as we were like realizing it. And I remember realizing really quickly how easily they used the tools. Like they could pick up the phone and swipe it on and they could find stuff, and then realizing how hard it was to fight that. And so actually the book I wrote, which is a couple years old at this point, is all really talking about the parenting side of this. Like how do we help parents navigate the parenting end of this? Because it is really difficult. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I feel really lucky that my kids are teenagers now. And I don't know everybody feels that way about teenagers, but boy, am I glad. I didn't have to deal with what parents of the 5 and unders are right now.
Yeah,
So
definitely. No, thank you.
I wanted to ask you, Emily, a question. And it's basically, it sounds like your vision in the future, maybe we can talk about your vision in the future as maybe some sort of a way that Chromebooks as a one-to-one thing in the current, where it is most of the public will go away. But my question to you is more practical.
Yeah.
Right now, in LMSD, in my school district, we live in a state that we're one of the only states that still doesn't have a bell-to-bell ban. Our school district and the board are still not willing to even create a policy of bell-to-bell. So, you can, the question that I have is, let's say that what we're asking for, which is basically LMSD, the school district, to accept and adhere to its own policy that allows parents, if they want to opt out from one-to-one devices, they can, and the principal will create. Let's say that we do this. And let's say that because right now the school of my daughter in elementary, about a third of the parents, a third of the families would like to opt out. How do you think, is it like we're planning about like September, so this is coming up. How is this? Because the superintendent, for example, says, well, there's no way that we can do it. How do you expect it? Will it be a few classes that are not opting out, a few classes that are opting out? It's not feasible because also iReady is going to be part of the curriculum. Do you think that it's feasible at this point to opt out? Again, not as an ideal situation.
Yeah, no, I mean, I hear that. I understand it. It is part of the ecosystem problem I was talking about earlier. And that's not an excuse. I mean, the question, I'm planning to testify at my school board meeting tomorrow. And my question is, I just want to know what number to the answer to this question. How many children should be allowed to access porn, chatbots, and strangers on school-issued devices before you'll make a different choice? Just give me a number. And if that number is anything more than 0, because I cannot understand why you would say anything higher than 0, then you have a huge problem on your hands. So to do something will be very disruptive. To do nothing will be far worse. And that to me is the point that school administrators, there's a sunk cost fallacy too, this idea that we've spent all this money, so we should see. I had an IT person tell me that she needed to see these contracts out for the next few years before they could roll them back. Okay, so to her, there is an acceptable number of children who should be able to watch porn at school because they don't want to break a contract. The next level, I mean, we're hearing about social media companies on trial right now, which is great. They should be. The next thing that's going to happen are EdTech companies and then schools. And so unless people school administrators are starting to think about this like that, I don't think they're going to have any idea what's coming. And I am not saying this because I am advocating that you go out and sure, if there is harm, file a lawsuit. But I would love to see courageous school leaders say, wow, we've made a mistake. Sweden and Norway, the entire countries are saying we made a big mistake and we're rolling it back. What great modeling for our kids to be able to say we screwed up, we know better now, we're going to do better. Chromebooks themselves were a failed product that were ditched on schools because they didn't make it in the business world. So it wasn't like thought and care went into this before they gave them to students. It's not like these products have been vetted for safety, efficacy, and legality before they've been deployed in schools. And yet that's what's happened. So, I mean, with all due respect, I don't care if that's hard for them. That's their job. They need to do something differently, and they need to do it soon. So that's my answer.
Yes, I completely agree. I ditto. We're going to switch to some Q&A now because we've got a bunch of wonderful questions from all of the participants. And I'll take this one as well if you want. I think we could both add to this. But where are the teacher unions on this?
Yeah.
Aren't they a large population with power to shift this norm back to basics?
You would think. Jill, you take it, and then I'll talk about what I'm noticing. But I'm actually very curious what you would say.
When I heard that the union in the city, I'm in New York, partnered with AI, I lost my mind. I lost my mind. So I have been very vocal with my home union where I not my home, but where I teach because I have power there as a teacher, and I've been really honest with them that you please bring this up to the next NICET, and finally I did speak to the president of my union again last week, and I was like, are we there yet? She's like, we're there, we need to touch base. And I really think that all unions, big or small, really need to focus on this issue because, like you said, pitting the parents versus teachers, we are missing the point. Like, as much as I want my kids to learn, I also want to do what I love, which is this job. And this really, I agree that we need the unions to realize that like our jobs are at risk. And as a public school teacher, I'm very afraid for public schools because tons of people are leaving public schools all over the country because they're the worst right now with
Yeah. Yeah.
technology in the
Yeah.
schools.
Yeah, I mean that's how I feel exactly. And I just shared that link. I wrote a story about
Oh,
how AFT partnered with OpenAI to build a, AI university for teachers in New York. I mean, this is the problem is they're captured by industry, and so at least the big ones, and so they're not going to I agree that it is mind-boggling that literally that's the job of the union is to protect the teachers, and that's not what's happening. When I was in actually one of the reasons I got into this fight in the first place was in 2019. So we talk about COVID is the reason this is a problem, but back in 2019, before COVID, I actually found out that Seattle schools, where I am, was adopting a science curriculum called Amplify for their K-8 science curriculum. And I went to the school board meeting to testify because I was like, they can't, and it was all digital. It was going to all be digital for K-8. And I was like, that doesn't make any sense. Why would you teach science on an iPad or a Chromebook? Like, science is like literally the most hands-on subject you can think of. And so I was like marched in there with my testimony, like, do not outsource the teaching of science to a bunch of tech companies. And what blew my mind in that meeting was that there were probably 100 people wearing red t-shirts there, and they were all teachers who were there at the request of the union, and their signs said, adopt, amplify. They were there advocating to adopt this tech-based curriculum. And I remember being like, what? I don't understand this at all. And I'm working on my second book right now, and that's my opening scene. But I remember I turned to the lady next to me wearing the shirt, and I was like, can you just explain? I'm like, I was a teacher for many years. I'm very curious, like, why are you here supporting this curriculum as a teacher? And she was so shocked and flustered. And she goes, oh, they just told us to be here. I just heard it's good. So that to me is one anecdote, but it paints a really big picture. So I think that is part of the problem is the capture, but also the fact that, again, teachers have limited power even with a union. Yeah.
yeah.
So first of all, the question of Jordan before about the equity, Jordan just wanted to close the loop. If it helps,
Oh,
this came up. The reason for the question was that it came up with the superintendent they spoke with. In a high poverty, more than 80% are free or reduced lunch district, and they said that they would absolutely not get rid of the one-to-one devices.
yeah.
So
Well,
that's just a comment.
that's depressing. And look at Baltimore schools. Baltimore superintendent, who, bless her, she's retiring. So I think she's like, I got nothing to lose. We're rolling it back. So I don't know if you can pull up that article. It was in the news in the last couple of weeks about how, and she pushed back specifically on the equity argument. And Baltimore is a high poverty district. So fascinating to see what she had to say about it. Yeah. I think the narrative will change. I do think there will be some, um, you know, epiphanies.
I'll try to find in a second the article, but to the question is, which I think is a very good question because it's been on my mind, honestly, in the lesson, all the people who live in my district who are, part of this grassroots movement. So the question was, how can we politely and diplomatically explain this stuff
Yeah.
to principals and more importantly, to school boards? School boards are not always necessarily teachers. It could be, physicians and
Exactly.
million different things. It tends to come across as like, oh, I'm right and you're wrong when we tell them that, or worse. So what is the most effective
Yeah.
way to urge positive change in our schools and really
Yeah.
to get to the superintendents and the board members?
Yeah. Well, I made an unplug EdTech toolkit, which is for free to download on my website. It has over 3,500 downloads in the last few months alone. And I map out a whole bunch of different questions and letter templates and things to consider. What I will say first is to please focus on relationships first as adults. Okay, because this is true for children too. I do not want parents to go in and start screaming at teachers. There are definitely some bad apples doing some not great things, and we need to address that. But remember who benefits when teachers are pitted against parents or admin. So
Yeah.
find the person with whom you have the best relationship at your school. It might be a school counselor, it might be the principal, it might be a teacher. And start there and just say, how can I support you? Because this is not safe, effective, legal, better than a human. And I want to find a way to make change. I would speak in terms of all children again, not focusing on my child. I know immediately when I go to school board meetings who's going to be ignored and who's going to be listened to in their public testimony by if they focus only on their own child, which is absurd. We should be able to get up there and tell our stories, but we're going to be dismissed as just a parent who has a ranting, story to tell. So, again, there's some strategy in how you approach that. I think the other thing is I'm actually going to teach a webinar next week about this. I have a link, I think, up on my Substack, about opting out, what that would look like. How do you approach schools, strategies for doing that? I think, again, I have moved from asking about opting out to telling that I'm opting out. And, again, respectfully, politely, but firmly saying, I just don't consent to this. And that one common pushback, and I don't know if this has come up in the comments, but like, you can't opt out of curriculum is something I hear all the time, that parents are saying, well, I tried and they told me I can't opt out of curriculum. And what Andy Liddell of EdTech Law Center has taught us is you're not opting out of curriculum. You want curriculum. You're opting out of the internet connected, data mining, privacy violating EdTech products that are not serving children or teachers. And so I want the curriculum. I have a right to the curriculum. My child has a right to the education, right? And so again, what we know will happen is that the burden gets, of course, put back on teachers, which is unfair. And we need to be, how can I support my teachers? Bring a ream of paper in if that helps. That's not a long-term solution. I fully recognize that. But, we don't want to burn bridges. We need to build bridges.
Yep. So there's a question here from Maria, and she says, "Hi, Emily, you're amazing. I work for Jonathan Haidt, and parents often ask, what do I do to get my kids' school to minimize ed tech? Where do you suggest parents start?"
I mean, my EdTech toolkit is certainly
Thinking that,
chock
yeah,
full of resources, but also I write at First Fish Chronicles on Substack, and I post, I mean, most of it's my contact, but do have guest essays on there, but there's additional resources there as well, lists of questions to ask. Again, like I said just a minute ago, start with the relationships first, asking questions, firm but clear. Mhm.
So the next question that I have is related to something that was brought up several times yesterday in the big board meeting. Multiple parents asked the same question or made the same comment. And maybe I'll connect it to you may have seen or you may have heard of the recent episode of 60 Minutes Australia, because
Oh,
they were talking not only about, like, it wasn't focused only on children, but they basically, and I know that you're not a neuroscientist, but they were talking more and more about there is clear evidence based on functional MRI
yes,
and other studies that being a lot on screens actually can harm the brain and harm the normal
yeah,
cognitive development of the brain. And
yes,
this,
yes,
many of us are hearing stories. For example, there's a neighbor who connected me recently to a news reporter who is working for Comcast as a big engineer. And he told me that the new engineers, in terms
yes,
not only the coding, but their
yes,
level of cognitive
yes,
creativity, etc., is very different than 10 or
yes,
20 years ago. So what are
yes,
your thoughts about, like, should we as parents really be worried about the fact that our kids
yes.
are a lot on screen, we're harming their brains?
Yes, yes, absolutely. And again, we're going to get told, oh, well, parents told us that we would rot our brains if we watched too much TV. Bring back the TV of the 1980s any
I
day, and you'll see a
know.
very different impact on children. These products are designed to hook and hold our attention. They tap into neural pathways. They
Yeah,
manipulate our hormones. I mean, again, it is mind-boggling to me that we would knowingly hand over health harming products to children, and yet that's what we're doing. And I think I said this in a podcast recently. It's like, before we don't want to. It's not parents' fault, but it's our responsibility to make different choices. And I think previously we didn't know that. We know this now. We have
yeah,
evidence, scientific evidence that this is harming children. And your response, I mean, I hear this from parents like, well, I don't want my kid to be the only one. But at what cost? I mean, what are you willing to
yeah.
sacrifice have your child fit in. And this gets into a whole bunch of like how we parent, our culture of
Yep.
parenting right now, which is I want to be your friend, not your parent. I want my kid to like me. We could probably do a whole webinar just on that. I mean, I totally know that and Jill has probably dealt with
I'm
a
just
lot of those
laughing.
parents.
Yes.
Yeah. And that is a problem. I mean, I'm very curious where the adults are. But to your point about like the Comcast, I was speaking to a woman who runs a large engineering firm. She said almost the same thing. She said, we hire top graduates from top universities who have coding skills up the wazoo. They show up, and this is her quote, they cannot function as humans. They cannot look people in the eye. They cannot problem solve. They cannot think creatively. It doesn't matter how great your tech skills are if you can't function as a human. And I think the business industry should be
Yeah.
sitting up and taking note of this because it is going to affect their bottom line as an industry. I mean, and I'm not just the tech industry. Like to me, it's like they're, what's the thing called the snake that eats itself? I can't remember the name, but it's
Yeah.
that. That's what's happening. It's absurd.
Yep.
So, and before Jill takes the next question, I have a comment because you mentioned before the video that you just, it was
Yes.
online just yesterday, and there's hundreds of thousands of people. And you also mentioned that you read some of the comments, and some of them were nasty, some of them were nice.
Yes.
And that made me think of, in a much smaller scale, when we have meetings or whatever, I do something on, that's the only reason that I use Facebook to basically advertise. And sometimes I look at the comments, sometimes they're nice, and sometimes they are mean like hell. And
yeah.
then I'm thinking about my school district.
Yeah.
Because in my school district, I know for a fact, because I've spoken with children and parents and teachers, and there's Instagram. And a lot of people are using on Chromebooks Instagram. And if this bothers me so much,
Yes.
me as a mature adult, reading a
Yes.
comment that like, oh, you're stupid or whatever it is. And I'm like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
how would it affect the children? First,
Yes.
on the side of not only the side of those people who are offending, who are just basically writing trash and horrible things because they don't have to look at your face, they're just writing it.
Exactly.
And then the child who's immature and they're getting all these comments, it's heartbreaking.
Yeah. Yeah. I am 48 years old, and the adrenaline rush that I get when I get a nasty comment or the like pit in my stomach is visceral. And I have a fully formed brain and I have a much thicker skin than I used to. So how on earth can we expect a 12-year-old or an 8-year-old to not have an very extreme response to that because they're not fully developed? Yeah.
And think about how we don't see those strangers at work the next day. Imagine having somebody say
Exactly.
something nasty and then they're sitting next to you in math class.
Exactly.
Oh,
Exactly. Yeah. No, I've actually been thinking about getting off of Instagram. I mean, it's very interesting to me how the social media platforms, where I get the vitriol, where I get the most hate. Instagram's pretty bad. I'm way nowhere near X for a variety of reasons, but that was the worst initially. But I mean, I've been called all kinds of names. Today, I was called a snake oil salesman for the tech industry, and the person signed it, parent, educator, and EdTech leader. And I was like, but the irony is that, like, no, it's just mind-boggling to me. And I agree. I think what I've tried to reclaim some of my power is to turn off commenting, but to make a comment that says, I will not engage with you in the comment section. People are clearly not reading the caption or watching the whole video. They just are dogpiling on to, get, whatever engagement. They're bored. They're bots. I don't know. But I realize how much my emotional energy goes to that, and I can't afford that. I have so many more important things to be doing, and yet I get sucked in easily, just like, children. Yeah.
yep. And a kind of a connecting question from Jordan, who is because of the social media trials and YouTube essentially being found guilty of harm, how do you think parents can advocate for getting YouTube out of schools?
Yeah, I mean, I do not understand. Well, let me be clear. I know there's educational stuff on YouTube and you can find fun things and interesting things. I'm not saying there isn't, but YouTube is a social media platform. And, even my own district was part of that lawsuit that's, school districts had sued social media companies. And I was like, the ultimate irony is they posted about the lawsuit on their social media platforms. I was like, you can't sue them and then use the product. And then, like that kind of is crazy to me. But yeah, I mean, YouTube is not safe to give children access to. I think if you, again, as a teacher, Jill, if you had a video that you wanted to queue up that didn't have ads ahead of time, I mean, this is the kind of thing, like that's very different, giving teacher that control and that autonomy. But I would go through the discovery materials of the KGM case. There's a whole
Mhm.
piece in there about how YouTube realized that their viewership hours were down during school hours, and they have this conversation about how can we rebrand as an educational tool to get
Yes.
hours
Love
up
that.
during the school day. So
Yep.
again, saying the quiet part out loud, it's all about engagement because the more hours and eyes that we spend on the platform, the more ads they can show us and the more money they make. I mean, that's the model, right? So yeah, it's absolutely astonishing to me that YouTube's available to children in school. And they're watching thousands of hours of it a year, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And who knows what the content exactly, and
exactly.
violent. And so we have we're going to take a few more questions, and we're going to have a hard stop at 9:45 Eastern time, so max 10 more minutes. And thank
Okay.
you again for your patience, Emily. But
My
there's just a
pleasure.
lot of questions. So
Yeah.
Emily, other Emily, is asking a question: What power do parents? What parents do parents? What power do parents have to opt out? Can we just say no to the devices that are at our home? Meaning that if people just like they don't want it, but they are forced to bring the
Yeah.
Chromebooks or the iPads to do their homework, could there be an informed consent argument to be
Yes.
had for any of the platforms given student privacy concerns,
Yes.
especially in light of the Curriculum Associates, which is the I-ready lawsuit?
Right. Well, and numerous lawsuits. And in the interest of full disclosure, I'm the lead plaintiff in a class action against Power School, and we filed in 24 of May 24, and that was 6 months before the Power School data breach that swept up 40 million records. So, the short answer is, I think again, this is not about asking; it's about saying I don't consent and I refuse. What does that look like? Obviously, we can't tell our 5-year-olds to like stand up. Well, we can, and actually encourage parents to talk to their kids about it and to use language that's age appropriate. So to say, when I refused it for my child, it was like, oh, well, what are we going to do? Like, we can't, she's going to feel left out or like the weird kid. And we talked about that and we said, and I said, I want you to say when people ask, because I don't want this to be about blaming teachers. I don't want this to be about, your parents are better than my parents, whatever. And she just said, I just learn better on paper. And that was the statement that she used. And guess
Huh.
how many
That's a good
kids
one.
asked her about it after the first day? Zero. And we're 2 years into this. She doesn't have a laptop. So I think the other thing is, it's the data mining is an issue. I think one thing that schools could do that I would love to see is, first of all, they should publicly post a list of every product and app used by students. This is going to be tricky, A, because they probably don't know most of, or I shouldn't say most, they probably don't know all of them. And maybe Jill can attest to this. Like, there's teachers who sort of are like, hey, let's pull up this app or let's look at this website. And like, they're not vetted and they didn't go through proper
Yep.
channels. That's a problem. But at the bare minimum, the vetted ones should be available publicly with a link to the privacy policy and then in plain English, not legalese, what parents are consenting to. All you need to do is go and look at one of these privacy policies to be horrified by the kinds of information that they all collect. And again, this is not just the school. This is the school contracting with a company that is collecting this information and then turning
Yep.
around and selling it to third parties for profit, right? That is not okay. And so again, to go back to the schools and say, like, are you aware of these? Can you show me the privacy policies? Those are some of the pushback I think we could give. I also think we could just forget to bring the laptop back to school on Monday. Now, I don't know, Jill, I'm sure this makes teachers' lives miserable too, but like, what if everybody forgot it on Fridays? I don't know.
So
Like,
what's interesting is I noticed actually that the schools that make it go home the most, actually my home district, one of the reasons why it went home with older students is because they didn't have charging stations at the school. And my school, I mean, I'll be honest with you, I teach in a one-to-one district, but you wouldn't even know it because we have no curriculum online. So although I technically have an entire
yeah,
cart that stays in my room, one for
yeah,
every student,
yeah.
you don't even know it's there because it's used so little.
I would
And like
love to know the economics of that, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
because it was used, of course, during
Yes,
COVID when
right,
we needed it and when it went
right.
home, and so we still have it, and it's just not utilized as much. I mean, we have the freedom, but like because we have the chargers in the cart, they
Yeah,
don't have to go home. So
right.
like that's an easy thing too. Is like don't say they need to be charged if you do need them for when you need them. Have a
Yeah,
device
right.
charging.
Right. And the other thing that just absolutely makes me so angry is at the beginning of the school year when you get all that paperwork and it's like the responsible use agreement that parents are
Yeah.
asked to sign for the devices. I mean, I have yet to see one that says anything about the district's responsibility to the children when
Yes.
children encounter inappropriate content or scary or violent stuff.
Yep.
It's all about you as the parent are responsible. If your child misuses it, you have to pay for it. My niece had her laptop in a locker at school and the water bottle above leaked onto hers. Like it was locked in a locker. She was not doing anything
Yeah.
wrong. And my sister was charged for the laptop damage.
Oh my
Like
gosh.
that is, first of all, absurd on so many levels, but also has nothing to do with education or teaching children. And so, like, at the bare minimum, these use agreements should be about how the district will protect children, not about how parents will be responsible. I mean, that, again, don't get me going.
Yeah.
I'm angry about that.
Yeah. We have one person that wants you to know that she'd like you to stay on Instagram, please.
Oh, well, I thank you. And you know, the irony is I actually was thinking about hiring a university student of mine to help me manage the account because I need to step away from it. But then I'm like, but I don't want this young adult on it either. You know, it's like I don't want to be putting her on this site, but thank you. I might just start doing different things like posting without allowing comments. Like, I don't care if
Yes.
people want to chime in and say they love it or don't. Just you can share or not. You can like it or not. And then we don't have to get into it. So we'll see. I'm trying to think about it. Thank you.
So I wanted to apologize to everybody because we're not going to get to all of the many questions. And I'm going to just finish with one last question here. But before I ask that question, I wanted to say really thank you. I mean, it's so amazing to hear both of you, Jill and Emily. You are like, you are so passionate about this. It's so clear that your message is coming from your heart and from decades of experience in working with children and families. And thank you for sharing all of this information with us. Again, many people I'm sure enjoy this and many people will watch this. So I just wanted to say thank you
Yeah.
and have a good
Yeah.
night. But the last question is from a parent. And I kind of feel a little bit, like this because she says, my son, who is in kindergarten, like my child, tells
Mhm.
me about all the time that he spends on the iPads and Chromebooks in school. It kills me every time I hear about it. Not to mention the classroom smart board, like a giant screen when they watch videos and call them brain breaks. What do
Yeah.
you suggest that I do to try to reduce the amount of time that they have spending on the screens? She hears it from her child.
First of all, I'm sorry that's happening, and I hear this all the time. And then the second thing I would say is, what do they do for children who want a brain break from screens? Like, I think there's probably a lot more healthy options for brain breaks. I mean, first of all, again, I know this parent knows this, but like what I would do is I would send an email to the administrator and I would just say, I'm very curious how you define brain breaks and what you see as the purpose of them and how you measure whether or not those are effective actual brain breaks, right? Like, and why is it that a screen-based tool is that solution? Because really, I think you either need to relabel them as screen time, because that's what they are, or you need to give children actual breaks. And what we know is that children are really great at having free play. I mean, again, if they're allowed to, right? Like, so anyway, that is appalling and happens all the time. I want to get rid of the choice time. The fact that iPads are available during choice time is absurd. And do what Jill's doing, going back to centers that are non-tech based.
So
There's
for my teacher workshops, I do a whole thing on like all of my favorite new brain breaks that are not screen free,
oh,
or if they're
perfect.
screen, it's like just the question and they have to go to the corner of the room that matches for four corners, and then they talk
There
with
you
the
go.
person about why they picked
Yeah.
that. And it's been so fun. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I lost this. But why did it
Yeah.
start? Because during COVID, we had to do something that we
Right.
could do virtual. Then when
Right.
we went back to the
Right.
classroom, we were still masking and 20 feet apart. So
Yeah.
you can just see the pattern.
Yeah.
Nobody is doing this because we don't have what's best interest in kids, but it became a
Right.
habit.
Yes.
And then
Yes.
I had to strategically think, oh, I got to break this habit.
Yes.
So I
Yes.
just want to be the one that's
So
nice,
great.
like, hey guys, let's break the
Yeah,
habit.
exactly. That's such a good point. I mean, again, I hear that a lot from teachers too, is like, I got really great at mastering these digital tools during COVID
Yes.
and online learning and all that, and during having to 20 feet and all that. And you're right. It's a habit we have to break. And it's gotten worse. I mean,
Or
I
maybe
think,
it was 6 feet. My gosh, look, I'm forgetting how many feet it was. It was so
but to
long.
your point that like, but again, it's like I was saying earlier, it's like that was a lifeboat when we needed it, but a lifeboat is
Yes,
not long-term housing, and we shouldn't be living
yes,
in lifeboats.
Yeah.
Yeah.
exactly.
All right, everybody. Well, we're on time, 9:45. Thank you. This has been an incredible experience. It's so good to talk to you, Emily. So good to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you
And
very
have a
much
good
for
night,
Thank
having
you.
everybody.
me.
For everybody who joined us.
Have a great night.
Thank
Thank
you
you
so much. Have
guys.
a great night.
You.
Bye
Bye-bye.
bye. Good night.
Good night.